Hi, and welcome to yet another, finally, episode of Kasper On BI. It's been a while. I got busy doing a lot of other things, but really excited to be back today with a really interesting topic, security. I know this is something that a lot of us are not necessarily thinking about because we are traditionally uh, BI, data people talking about roll-up security, and we don't really think about network security. We don't really think about um, um, identity security, all of these things. But it's super important, and especially in the world where we're moving from a on-premise, a PaaS to a SaaS world, where things just change. You're bringing data instead of to a handful of users who need to work with data to hundreds of thousands of users inside of your organization, and they need to be able to access it without going through a lot of loopholes. So today we'll talk with Merill Fernando, who's from the Entra team, and he's going to tell us all about what is going on in the identity security space, focusing on zero trust and talking about VPNs and things like this. So it will be really exciting. I know it's probably going to be a bit far away removed from what your day-to-day job is, but I hope you'll find it really interesting. And with that, let's go to the episode. So, hi, Merill. Honored to have you on the podcast. It's really exciting for me to have someone outside of our traditional data org on the podcast, but on a topic that is super important for a lot of us. Even though it's pretty far removed from our day-to-day tables and relationships and SQL queries, it is the cornerstone of every product because we want to make sure our data is secure and governed. So again, thank you for coming on. Can you share a little bit of what you do at the company and start there?
Yes, absolutely. So I'm Merill Fernando. I'm a product manager in the Microsoft Entra team. We used to be called Azure Active Directory before. Now it's Microsoft Entra. We are growing and evolving the product. My day job is I'm in the team that's called the Custom Acceleration team. So what I do is I help some of our large customers, help them deploy Microsoft Entra. That's part of my job. The other big part is making sure the feedback we get from customers gets into the product team, into engineering. I specialize in Microsoft Graph, Graph PowerShell, sort of the API extensibility side of Microsoft Entra. I focus a little bit more on that because I'm sort of a developer at heart. I've played lots of different roles in my career, and I sort of try to bring all of that together in this role. And it's a fun role. So I get to, every day I just wake up pinching myself. This is like a dream job. And it's been, I think, 4 years now, fourth year starting in March. And I'm having fun every year.
It actually sounds pretty similar to my team, the customer advisory team for Microsoft Fabric. So we should think of that on that later after this too, because I have some questions for you about that. But so maybe you were talking to me a little bit before, but can you share like how you, like I like to hear some background story. Like how did you get started and how did you get into security?
Yes, absolutely. So how did I get started? Well, it goes way back when I was in school, and like in grade 6 or 7, my cousin used to be in computing, where this was during the MS-DOS, Lotus, that age, when it was like just GW Basic and all of that. But he got me interested. There was this course they did for kids, and I attended like for 3 months, and I was like hooked on. I said like I want to do this for the rest of my life. So as soon as I finished school, I didn't even finish school. I somehow convinced my parents that this is what I want to do, and they were good. They let me I actually dropped out of school at grade 10. And just went into computing, and basically gone on through there. So when I started working, it was all, I first joined up in sort of an institute that was teaching coding and stuff to kids in a sort of a school, working part-time. But I soon joined the software engineering. This was during like the VB, Visual Basic 3, Visual Basic 5,
Yeah.
like a long time back, doing stuff in Clipper. I don't know if you remember Clipper, DBase 4, 5.
No, I think
It's
I just
very
started
old.
coding with VB4. I think that's when my dad
Okay.
brought that home to me. So
Nice. Yeah. So this was during the MS-DOS stage days. We had Clipper was like a database thing. You had to load multiple disks to get the database program up and running.
yeah,
Basic forms, in the DOS prompt, and you can fill stuff in. So yeah, I go way back, but VB sort of changed a lot of those things. And my first real programming job was actually working for a UK firm, and it was um, building sort of a hospitality system. That's where I learned a lot of the enterprise side of things. So like working with SQL Server 6.0, 6.5, writing Visual Basic code that worked against all of that and doing stuff. So that was sort of my journey. So initially, I did start off a lot into the database side of things, working on data warehousing, SQL analytics, so did a lot of DTS,
of
data
course, yeah.
transformation services way back then. Yeah, so been through all that, burnt myself doing things which it was not meant to do. But yeah, so that was how I got started, and uh, I moved on to, and I moved from Sri Lanka. This was all back in when I was in Sri Lanka, and I moved to Australia around 2008, and then I came to this new world of like SharePoint, developing, building applications for SharePoint and so on, and then somehow started managing one of the biggest Microsoft 365 tenants in Australia, and one of the first ones, like back in 2014, 2012, 2014.
Did you ever have to
And
install Power Pivot into it? Power Pivot for SharePoint?
our pivot, yes, yeah, I did some of that way back. Yeah,
Yeah, that's
yeah,
how I started.
all of
I still have Kerberos nightmares from that.
yes, yeah, setting up all those SSPs, SSPs, PNs, and yeah, it's crazy. It was a crazy time. And so that's why, having been burned through all of that, then coming to Microsoft 365, and I looked at Azure AD, it was called Azure AD then, and I was like, this is the future, because I could see that being the center of almost everything else. Like, you have any other product, you still need identity in the center for all of that. And I was like, this is a good place to be in. It was really small at that time, but I could see that being the center of like any organization, a core part of it. So having to look after Microsoft 365, working on the security side of things, it was new to almost all the security folks as well, even back then. So I spent most of my time talking to the cybersecurity folks I worked with and explaining to them like all the dangers of what we should be looking out for and so on. And I sort of accidentally fell into that role, and
Typically
it
how it
was I
goes.
was
Yeah.
quite lucky. I worked with my current, not my current, my last ex manager, when I was a customer, on the customer side of things. And when a role opened up, he asked me if I wanted to join. So I was like, I was very surprised first. Like, is this the real role where you get to come in and you help people out and share the knowledge? And like, for me, that's something I just do naturally as well. And it was like, oh, someone's paying me to do this, like learn things and spread that knowledge and share it with people, with others. So I sort of jumped at the opportunity when it happened.
Yeah, because you're also pretty active on like X and YouTube yourself too, right? So I'll put links in the
Yes,
description. But
yeah,
I do follow you, and I learn from your posts. So definitely thanks for that.
nice. Yeah, I try to. People are very busy these days, and they want a way to, like, we all have sort of a little bit of ADHD these days with TikTok and all these things. So I try to condense knowledge and say, what can I give someone in sort of like a 10-second view of, like, I try to create visuals where you can quickly, easily grasp like some technical knowledge within that short time, at least just to file away in your memory, so you can refer back saying, oh, okay, I remember that, I should be able to do it this way. So that's my goal, to share small nuggets of information, because we have great documentation. Like if you go to Microsoft Learn docs, there is amazing docs. We have amazing content writers. There's so much there, but it's just that people don't have the time to read all of that, right? And they can't sit and go through all of that. So I try to share small nuggets and point to the docs, so that when they do need to, they can go back and refer. And then it's actually when you're doing something like a project, or you need to deliver something, that's when you would go in and sit and read the docs end to end. But sometimes you just need to know what's possible, right? And that's what I try to do as I share my knowledge.
Yeah, makes sense. Cool. All right. So, anything more you want to share about yourself? Anything that we all should know, like some crazy hobbies or something?
Crazy hobbies. Yeah, I just try to. I'm a crazy command line person, so I don't know if folks know about this. I created this tool called cmd.ms. I don't know if some of your folks
Probably
might know. It's basically like a command line. So I had this trouble when I had to demo something, like go to conditional access maybe on the Entra portal. You have to go to the Entra portal, click 3 or 4 times before you got to the blade where you want to do stuff. Or even in Azure, you wanted to go to resource groups or VMs or to some particular place. You had to click a few times. So I created this thing called cmd.ms, where you can just type in, say if you want to go to VMs, you say azvm.cmd.ms, you go straight into that blade on the Azure portal. So I'm sort of like a command line person who likes to use a lot of shortcuts, and that's
I think
that's
that will
another
resonate very well with a lot of the listeners. So I'll definitely put the link in the description below. All right, so let's go more into the details, and let's first get the name change out of the way. Azure AD became Entra. Like it's still a lot of people. It's still Azure AD. This is something that is so ingrained in everyone's mind, but now it's became Entra. So what does it mean, and what is Entra?
Yes, absolutely. So Azure AD, as the name implied, was a directory service. When we first started, it was mainly sort of like we needed a Microsoft 365, we needed SharePoint Online, we needed a place to store the users and have them sign in and so on. So the name didn't really was not very truthful, because it was not Active Directory running in Azure. Some people would assume that, right? And that was a misnomer that a lot of folks had, even until we did the rename, right? A lot of stakeholders thought, I have Active Directory on-prem. Azure Active Directory is just AD running in the cloud. But but in reality, that was not the case. It was a complete sort of a rewrite of directory service that was running at global scale in the cloud, right? This directory is nothing like your on-prem AD. You could like create a user, and within seconds, you would see that user's data replicated to other data centers. So if someone I created a user in Melbourne, and someone in the US went to their data center node, which they would obviously go to, they would see that user within seconds. So there's lots of things happening behind the scenes to make all of that available. So we just couldn't take AD and run that in the cloud. That's definitely not how it worked. So it was built from ground up as a global scale directory service. Like we have trillions of signals coming in every single day, like billions of users signing in, and it's very different to on-prem sort of Azure AD. So from the beginning itself, the name was a misnomer, but what happened over time is we've started adding a lot more than just directory services. So Azure AD was not just about users and groups. We added lots of features onto it. We added governance. We added features like PIM, privileged identity management, where you didn't have admin access 24/7. We created this concept of having just-in-time access. So if someone is working on a support ticket, then you get just-in-time access to be maybe a database admin. You elevate your role, do the work maybe work on a ticket for an hour or two, then automatically the permissions are brought down. So the surface area for an attacker is reduced. So that is like another feature in privileged identity management, identity protection. And we've been adding so many. Like last year, we announced total of like 5 new products in the family. And so it was no longer just a directory service, and we had to give them names, and calling them something Azure AD didn't make sense because they had nothing to do with the directory services, right? So
Yeah.
we had this new thing called Entra Permissions Management, which scans your cloud, because everyone is moving to the cloud, right? On AWS, Google, Amazon, and no one really knows across this cloud what your company footprint is, who has access to what. Are they having too much permissions? Like, how do you know someone has permissions and they've never used it for like 3 months? Do they really need that permission in the long run? So in the cloud, it's sort of like a black box to a lot of people, right? And there are new services that we are bringing in, like Entra Permissions Management, that scan all of that. We are moving to a more decentralized identity, based on open standards like verified ID or distributed ID. So we are looking to a future where you might not have a single directory that has all the users and usernames and passwords. It'll be a decentralized network, right? Where you would just have your identity in your wallet, and you would use that to say, just like you use your driver's license, right? There's no like a global directory of all the passports. You show your passport and people know, they trust that proof. So it's like a decentralized network of data, and we are bringing that concept as well, right, into Microsoft Entra to do that. We are bringing in identity governance. And the newest, hottest one everyone's all excited about is global secure access or secure service edge. And I think a lot of folks who are listening to this podcast will be interested in is how to secure access to your data that folks are getting access to. So all of that coming in, us calling and sticking with that Azure AD name didn't make sense. So that's why we created this brand of Microsoft Entra and all these different services here. And I actually created a mind map that I share, and I'll share that link with you, where I sort of, because it's so big, there are lots of different parts to it. And I thought it'll be good to create a mind map for people who are like completely new to Entra, to know where things are, what are the different features from. I'm a visual person, so that thing I was telling you about, like being able to quickly understand things, and that's what led me to create that mind map. And I'll share that in the link. It's, if you go to idpowertoys.com, you will see that mind map that you can open up and look at all the different features in Entra. If you click through, they actually open into the Microsoft Learn docs, and you can learn and explore more about all of the capabilities.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, and I think, so there's a lot happening continuously, right? Especially in the security world. Like, it's ever evolving. It's going really fast, and it's getting more complicated by the hour because everyone wants to work on their mobile phones, and they want to work on their laptops, bring your own devices, work from home, work from whatever, the beach. So things get complicated in a hurry, and Entra is evolving with this, right? So there's, and also the different types of services. Like, the traditional move that we've been seeing is, okay, we have an on-premise environment where everything is nicely locked down by IT and no one can access it. And then, as you said, you move to the cloud. Generally, it goes from on-premise server to a PaaS service, like something sitting in Azure, and just move all the stuff there. And again, in PaaS, it's you have the VM, you have the power. You can kind of replicate whatever you had on-prem. And then now we're seeing the emergence of the SaaS services, like an Office, like Dynamics, and how also we have Microsoft Fabric in there. And that is a different mindset, and also different attack vectors, right?
Yes.
So especially in the data world here, many times data people think about protecting data and as soon as we start talking about security, even in some of the sessions I do, the only thing they're asking about is, okay, what about row level security and how do I secure my data itself? But the most important security is like, how do we make sure that the right person connects to the platform, right? And yeah, this is where the new concepts come in. Like, instead of protecting the perimeter, we want to protect the person, because there is really no perimeter in a SaaS platform. You connect to the SaaS platform and we'll spin up a service somewhere and we'll give you access.
Yep.
Like, the perimeter would be fake. And so this is where Entra comes in, right? Because we, as you said before, Entra is at the heart of Fabric. Like, every connection or Office or Dynamics, every connection that is being made to those services goes to Entra and will be authenticated, will be validated. And yeah, so there are many possibilities about Entra that a lot of people don't know. And you guys have been working on this for a long time and very forward thinking in this space. It is this transition from PaaS to SaaS. So maybe you can talk about that a little bit too.
Yes, yeah, 100%. So like I went through this whole transition when I told you back in 2014, we were deploying Microsoft 365 to an organization. I was working in an enterprise which had like 80,000 odd users in the organization. And in Australia, you have this huge contingent of the workforce is made of employees, full-time employees, but there's also we have this concept of contractors, who are not employees, but they are actually working for the company. But they would come in with their own laptops, their own devices into the network. So the organization I worked was actually a networking company, like an ISP. So and they were sort of like their network went back to the original ARPANET, like that's part of the whole global internet at that time. They are very growing. They had grown up from network being the control plane, right? So everything was controlled with the network. You had firewalls, and they locked everything down. So imagine their surprise when we told the cybersecurity firms that, hey, we are going to move all the email out to the cloud now. And they went like, what are you talking? We can't move it out. Like, what's the security? Who has access to it? How do I know? And because they wanted to like touch all their networks, the data center, and like go down to the level of the network, lock it down to that level. And this didn't. This was a big sea change for them. So as part of that move, I saw the challenges for the cybersecurity firms as they sort of evolved into this new flow of understanding and accepting the cloud, right? So that was the first step, to accept that you didn't have control, and then to think of what are the new ways of implementing the controls, right? And that's where Entra came in. We've had this concept of zero trust for a long time, right? Like, people will need to access, and as recently as the whole COVID thing that showed, right, it accelerated a lot of things. You cannot lock people into a network anymore. So in 2020, when the network sort of the controls, when everyone had to work remotely, what happened is we had to go overnight to connecting without going into the office, right? There were like large organizations, some I know people in the US would work with directly as well. Overnight, they had to switch from everyone has to come into the office to say, okay, you can now check your email from home, right? And the network being the perimeter, the control no longer was valid. So even before that, it was happening, but 2020 sort of made it real to everyone, right? You stuck at home.
So can I ask a question? Like, the network as the perimeter is not valid. So, I mean, this is a thing we hear a lot when we talk about the zero trust. But, I mean, it's all software, right? So you can make it work, right? So you can make, what we're saying here is, with the network being the perimeter, it means like you need to VPN into your own private network. And within that own private network, you can access your resource like email, like things like this. I mean, theoretically, you could make it work, right?
Yes, you could make it work, but now at the global scale, let's take email for example, right? Everyone wants email and you want to check your mail on your mobile, right? But
Yeah,
not everyone wants to be running a VPN on the phone just to connect to mobile,
yeah,
just to check your email, right? Like we all sort of accept it now. If you want to access email or you want Teams, you would be able to expect it to be able to connect from anywhere, but you don't want to be running a VPN all the time, right? So with zero trust, we had to move to this new model of not just using the network. You will be able to access things, but what we do is we validate your access every time you connect and try to read data. Whatever the policies that the administrator of that tenant defines, we want to make sure that those are valid. So you can say not just an IP location, you can say you can only access from devices that I manage, right? My company. So I give you a laptop, I give you a mobile, or I apply security controls on the mobile. Um, so one of the organizations I worked with, they had a policy that all of their data had to be encrypted, right? So they made sure that all of the devices that connected to their network were all managed by them, like all the Windows PCs and those devices. And they made sure that they enabled BitLocker and it was turned on. So there were all of the security measures that were applied on those devices. And then using Entra conditional access, they could say, you want to connect to my data, whether it's email or Teams or Power BI, you need to come in from this device where I know that it's BitLocker is on there, there's encryption, and there's DLP and other software running where you cannot take the data out without my knowledge. So instead of just being the network, because end of the day, the network, while it was all good to think the network was nice and it was secure, there were lots of holes even there, right? Like you had contractors coming in with their own PC. All they had was they just needed a VPN. They could connect. VPNs usually did some basic checks, like is the firewall on, is antivirus on. But once they connected, they could just use OneDrive, download all the files, right? Power BI, CSV, whatever. They could download it, disconnect from the network. Now they take the laptop and like the data is out, right? There are no controls being applied to it anymore. So although the network was sort of an important thing, it wasn't foolproof in that, right? And we had to move to securing the data, making sure you had things like BitLocker, data encryption. So even if someone had those files, maybe the Excel file, you had data protection on it, and it couldn't be read
yeah.
unless
MIP labeling.
you authenticated the user.
That's the example I always give with MIP labeling. We have that on Power BI desktop files too. Like if you're, let's say
Yes.
you have your Power BI desktop file on a USB stick and you leave it on the train, like it's,
Yes.
if you don't have it MIP labeled, anyone can read it. But if you have it MIP labeled, you have to sign in before, so no one can
Exactly.
read it anymore. And this is why I'm always very impressed with the way that we have our setup at Microsoft, our own phones. Like you can't connect to the network if you don't update your phone. Like you have to be on
Yes.
the latest patch.
Correct.
And all of these things are all these conditional access, which is really interesting. So a little bit going back to that, because I mean, this is a question that comes up a lot with our customers too, because they are used to like VPNing into a PaaS service with their developers, and they want to make sure that hey, anyone who can access our PaaS service and who can access our data is on this inside of our network.
Yep.
And like to your point, you can do this with traditional VPN, but VPN is great when you have 5 developers connecting to a backend service. But if you start to move to 100,000 people in your organization, like
Yes.
you have to set up a lot of infrastructure in the background to make that
Yes.
happen. You have to pay, right? Because
Yes.
private endpoints and all these things are not cheap. Like all the data
Yes.
goes over your private network, and you have to start paying for it. So
Correct.
instead, like the thing that really scales is Entra Zero Trust, and this thing is really really interesting. And so, yeah, with the launch of Fabric, we were at the heart of this discussion as well. So what would you say to a lot of the customers who are in this process? Like, and I think we talk about Microsoft Fabric being the OneDrive for data, and I usually think OneDrive is really a good example of this. Like when we ask customers, like, "Hey, why don't you have OneDrive behind a VPN too?"
Yes.
And
Yeah, and that's a really good example, right? Like people expect to be able to get to their OneDrive on a mobile, and no one. If you told your employees that you need to be always connected to VPN to even use OneDrive, most people won't even install OneDrive on the mobile. So that's the reality of what people. There's this expectation set right on mobiles to be able to access email and OneDrive, Teams. There is that expectation. But it's also about controlling that plane of glass. So, from the Entra side of things, we know that not one solution would work for anyone, and different organizations have different security requirements depending on the type of data that they handle, right? There could be like nationally sensitive information. There could be corporate like sensitive information, and depending on where each organization is in their journey towards zero trust, they would be evolving their process. So um, the network is something they've usually grown up with, and they want to have that, or maybe even do zero trust, but also have the network in play, right? Like apply that control as well on top of the network. And as Microsoft, as Entra, what we do is we give that broad breadth of options to customers. So we initially had this service called Azure AD Application Proxy. It's now called Microsoft Entra Proxy, where you might have like an on-prem server on.
Yeah, application. Is it?
No, that's a different one. That's now called Defender for Cloud Apps. So our naming is all over the place. But application proxies was slightly different. What it did is you might have some on-prem web apps and services that you might be hosting on-prem, and you wanted people to access it over the internet, but protected with conditional access. So you could say you have to come from a company managed device, but you didn't want to open up the network to allow traffic to go in. So app proxy is actually part of Entra ID P1. It doesn't cost you much. Most people already have P1, so you can just drop in the small install, like an agent you install on your local network, and suddenly you can access your on-prem web applications over the internet. You didn't need to worry about setting up DNS, setting up SSL. All of that's taken care of by Azure AD. You get like a public internet-facing URL protected by Entra, and you can access those on-prem things. So that was what we've always had for a long time. And last year, we announced this new place where we are moving into, which is people are used to running VPNs. We were talking about VPN, right? Like, and when COVID hit, a lot of organizations had to purchase hardware, expand their VPN capability. So because everyone was joining in remotely, right? And because they had to handle all that traffic coming in to their network, when previously they might have catered for like 10% of the company working remotely, suddenly it's flipped around and you had like 90% working remotely or more. So a lot of organizations threw a lot of money to that. And what we've done with Entra now with the global secure access is we built like a global scale cloud VPN, right? And we give your security firm, security teams visibility into all of the data that people are accessing, whether you're accessing an app that's on-prem or whether you're accessing a SaaS app like Salesforce, even Microsoft 365. We have this solution called Entra Private Access and Entra Internet Access, where we manage the VPN for you, because the fact is we already have these running, right? Like we have teams running, your network calls already coming to the Azure network, right? All of the traffic is already coming. So we basically enable that and give cybersecurity teams visibility into the traffic and being able to apply conditional access policies. We call these universal conditional access policies. to those applications. Strong MFA and all those capabilities can be applied. So it is where we tell you, like, we'll run the VPN and you just need to configure the admin side of things. You don't need to really worry about the volume of traffic and how people have it running, and your users can be anywhere because we are at like a global scale. We are one of the few companies that can run this cloud VPN and have it like scale at the global level, because we have presence like all over the globe, right? When you think of Hotmail, Outlook, Hotmail, Xbox, all those data centers and servers where Azure runs, that traffic was already coming to Microsoft. What we've done is we've just enabled new security capabilities on those endpoints. So you can now have the data connected securely from your workstation to the Azure network, to our backend, to the backbone, without it ever having to go outside, right? To traversing over sort of public network. It's all encrypted and channeled through our Azure backbone into all of the different Azure services. So it's a very unique offering, and so many people are excited. We are right now in public preview at the moment, so people can test it out and so on. And everyone is very, very excited about this launching. And I'm sure for your customers, this will become a new option for them as a way to secure the data that you have access into Fabric and so on.
Yeah, so this is one of the features that got announced at Ignite, in the last Ignite conference. You were talking like 5 new features or something. I did see a lot of them. So this is this is called SSE. Is this SSE or is it something else?
Yeah, it's Microsoft Secure Service Edge. So SSE is sort of a new, like this industry standard about how you can access secure, like the service edge, where the last point where people go to connect to the application, how you can secure it from that end. So that's the industry terminology for this type of service. And the product that we have is Entra Internet Access, which you use to access internet-facing applications. And that includes Salesforce, SuccessFactors, any cloud SaaS app that your users access that's running on the internet. We will be able to protect them, give a lot of visibility to admins, allow admins to define policies on who can access, what they can do. You can even say things like, you need to use a FIDO2 key before you can access SuccessFactors. So you can define these policies, and you don't even need to touch SuccessFactors and those other applications. You just do the change in Entra. And you can even apply the policies to on-prem. So if you have a SQL database on-prem, you can now say, I need you to use a pass key or a security key to access this SQL Server traffic. And you don't need to touch the actual on-prem app. It's all managed and done by the client that's running on your device. So it's a new, unique offering that's there because we manage both the network, identity, the authentication experience. All of that ties in, and it's sort of a very unique offering that's available from a security perspective.
So that makes sense. Okay, so let me bring it back a bit, because I think we talked about a lot of different new features, functionalities, and features.
Yep.
One interesting thing is, like even today with Power BI, let's take Microsoft Fabric out of the equation completely. Let's just talk about Power BI, which has been there for a long time. All of these features are, like, Entra is available for Power BI too. And like, maybe you're not surprised, but I've been doing this session on security for Power BI for, I think, like 4 years at different conferences. And all the time when I talk about Entra functionalities and features and things, people come up to me afterwards and say, I had no idea this was possible. So it often is the case, like it probably is the same in the office world. Like, people are focused on SharePoint, they're focused on the functionalities and features of SharePoint, and they don't know about all the functionalities and features that are available in Entra. And the security team is focused on security, and they're not focusing on, like, the rest of the... So if you want to, like... And then again, also a lot of the security teams and infrastructure teams, they come from the past, on-premise. way of working, which is often like
Yes.
it is pretty much the same as the way when we started with Power BI, we had a similar problem. Power BI is a product that everyone just took up. They installed Power BI Desktop, they get going, and everyone is enthusiastic. And then at one point, IT figures out like all these people are doing all this stuff. So
Yes.
the early days of Power BI, we used to get phone calls like, how do I turn this thing off? Like I said, well, do you really want to turn it off? Because the business users might not be happy. And then at one point, like they got into this like, okay, yeah, sure, let's manage it instead. But it's a different way of thinking. And I feel like this is the same thing with this whole zero trust, working from home. Instead of the perimeter, like the VPN, thinking about the identity at the heart of it. But like, how would you convince non-security people, non-IT people, like that their IT team needs to think about these things and what are the benefits of it?
Yes, yeah. So, like my personal experience is sort of quite similar. There was an organization I was working with, and they found everyone was using Power BI and being very productive, creating dashboards and going on well. And then the cybersecurity team went, "Hey, that's like I don't have any more control of the data now. It's not neatly in a backend SQL DB anymore, and in servers that's being rendered." So they first tried one option where they said, "Okay, you can only access Power BI in an RDP session." So they said, like, you cannot have Power BI on your desktop. You have to remote into this VM that's running in our servers in the backend, and you'll need to see. So depending on the type of data, that makes sense for those people. And if you can sort of pay for that, right? Because you're basically having another box somewhere for every person to have the data. So if you have that luxury of being able to spend in that way, that's one way to secure it. But then all the laptops that people have, all that compute and the power that they have to be able to generate and view those dashboards, that's sort of
And
wasted.
you also don't have the mobile, right?
Yes, yeah, because people need to be able to make decisions, right, on that data and have access to those dashboards. And without that, you cannot be agile enough. So there is always that friction from the type of organization as to what is important for them, like whether they need to be competitive and be able to make those fast decisions. You need to have access to that data, right, in real time and from wherever you need to access. So at the end of the day, that's what it comes down to. Like you need to work it out with the cybersecurity, because security is important as well. Because if you're not secure, then maybe your business doesn't even exist, right? If you have if your customers cannot trust you, then that's another important factor. So it doesn't matter that you are productive and working and being able to do everything if it's not in a secure manner.
Of course,
so
yeah.
It is a balancing act, and different organizations will land in a different scale. Like they'll all have different scales of where they would land. And some of the more mature ones, what I've always seen is they have this sort of being able to know, which is very hard, right? To know what data they need to secure at what level. So they are okay with some data being the summaries, and some data being accessible widely, whereas some of the data, sort of their crown jewel, they don't allow it to leave their data center. It'll always be in the back end, and you will be able to get sort of an extract of the list of sort of the generalized information, for example, and that is sort of okay. So, but it's a challenge, right? As we all know, it's not easy to do that level of categorizing and so on. You need to have a lot of maturity to be able to know what your data layout is, and then how you manage them from that point. But the biggest challenge, it's all over the place, not just on the fabric and data side.
Of course.
I work in a V team where we talk about zero trust, and our thing is always to bring from the customers we work with all these different teams to like one single meeting to discuss things, because usually what happens is they don't talk to each other.
Yeah.
Right? The security team, like they're all in their different part of the world. doing things, and they rarely sort of come together and discuss things and in a constructive way to move forward. And half of what we do in our zero trust engagement with customers is to bring these people together. So we do things like from the Sentinel side and etc., from the database, from the networks, from Entra, the identity side, and from the devices, Intune, and all those different teams. We bring them together and we run these workshops of how they can bring all of that together. Because what we notice is they have Intune deployed, they're doing like, enabling BitLocker and all of those things. But they don't have things like a conditional access policy that says you have to come from a secure device. So they're doing half of it, but not completing the like what was meant to happen with the conditional access policy that actually enforces that check. So it's about bringing those different parts of the company together to work on sort of that a productive way to get to that endpoint.
Yeah,
And
and
sometimes
this is,
having someone like Microsoft.
yeah, and this is probably why a lot of people just say like, okay, let's just put it in a private endpoint, and that's a easy check mark.
Yes, yeah, which it sounds easy, but it is not, right? When you think of a global scale solution, there is no private IP range or a network, because the reason you have it at global scale is to be able to be productive. People from all over the world be able to access things in minutes, sort of like in seconds, and be able to see the dashboard. You don't want to spend like 2 minutes waiting for your dashboard to load, especially if your user is somewhere, say in Australia, and your data is living in the US, and you want that to be able to work very seamlessly, right? That experience. So coming together and going through the shortest path to get to the data is also important.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, so you bring them together, and then like, because I mean, the more I'm seeing, and I actually watched quite a bit of your Ignite sessions from the Entra team, and there's a lot of talk about zero trust and a lot of talk about, and so I don't know much about the rest of the industry, but it feels to me like this is something that the whole industry is moving towards. Not just Entra, but is it like Okta and a few other of the Entra competitors are leaning more and more into this direction. Is that a fair thing to say?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So things like doing identity protection, making sure uh, using smarts to prompt for MFA. So it's not just a static thing where you ask for MFA once, or you force people to change passwords every 90 days, but being smart about only forcing a password change once we detect that the password is compromised, or prompting for an MFA when we detect this person used to always come from, say, I'm in Melbourne and suddenly I'm signing in from Sydney or from another country. Then being intelligent and saying, okay, you're in a new place, I need you to prove who you are to me, and then prompting for MFA. So being smart about doing identity protection and those capabilities. So a lot of the industry is moving away from sort of static controls to being more dynamic, using a lot of machine learning and other things to know when to prompt, like noticing patterns and then detecting that, right? So same with all of your Fabric and the data stores, right? If you suddenly see a pattern where someone is downloading a large volume of data, then you sort of would trigger these alerts for those particular scenarios, which we are doing with things like Microsoft Graph, etc. With OneDrive, if someone is suddenly downloading a lot of files, we send out an alert, and then the cybersecurity teams can follow up and understand what's happening in that space.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. So okay, so maybe the second to last question, like, let's say, and again, it's quite cool that you had your own experience with this, but let's say you are a data person, like you're nicely developing Power BI and you're doing data warehouses, and now you're faced with your security team asking you a lot of questions and they want to do a lot of things, but Entra is massive, right? There's so much. I mean, all the stuff that you talked about is probably only tip of the iceberg of all the things that are there.
Yes.
Where should I go to learn, and what should I learn about at the minimum? Like, what are some things that I should at least know? Like, I don't expect all the data people to know Entra the way that a security expert would, but what are the things that they should know and what they should think about, especially when you're probably a consultant or someone in the organization that is responsible for like growing adoption of the data products?
Right. Yeah. So the things that you would need to do is usually, if it's the cybersecurity teams are not used to the cloud, what they will want to do is just only use IP restrictions, right? Like that's what's been the bread and butter for so long. People just want to say, yes, this IP range, and I want to just lock it down to this set of IP ranges. But as you know, with a PaaS service, there is no IP range. Like for OneDrive, there's no IP range for OneDrive
In
that you
SaaS
can
service,
say, I want to connect, right? With the SaaS services.
Yeah.
There is, and I would say even with PaaS, unless they support a VNet, again, you wouldn't be able to have an IP range. But definitely with SaaS products, there's no IP range, right? So you cannot use that old school way of controlling things. And so if you want to learn something with Entra, we have this thing called Entra Conditional Access, right? And conditional access is like a policy engine where the admins can define a policy. So your cybersecurity team can define a policy and say, okay, someone is accessing Fabric, they're trying to sign in. Say at a minimum, I need to do MFA, right? You have to use multi-factor authentication to sign in. Maybe you can make it stronger multi-factor by using new phishing resistant auth and say, I don't want somebody to be phished and then give access to Fabric to someone else. They need to use something like we have these UB keys I'm showing here. So this is phishing resistant. And what that means is, even if someone, all these training that people do, they try to send you a link and try to make you click the link. And when you see a page and you're typing your password, you're actually giving away the password and the MFA to an attacker. I did a nice video showing how that works and how to use conditional access to prevent that. So we have this phishing resistant authentication, where if you use things like this, if you use Windows Hello for Business, there's a new capability coming called passkey, where you don't need to purchase anything new. You can just use your phone as a phishing resistant auth method. So today, Authenticator is not phishing resistant, but it will when we deploy this new capability. So you would work with your security teams to say, okay, let's improve the security that way, right? So we cannot just use IP range anymore. Let's make sure the authentication that we're using is not just password. Let's do MFA. Let's do phishing resistant MFA. So then we have raised the bar in terms of the security of like who is accessing the data. So it doesn't matter where they're coming from. We have validated that it is the actual person, not someone sitting in another country who fished the user, got their username, got their password, and now they are connecting in. And then you do, in conditional access, you can do device compliance and other things, which when you go there, you need to work with your Intune and other teams to deploy, things like encryption on the device, the number of the pins they can use on the phone and so on. So most companies that have E3, Microsoft 365 E3, they have this capability with them. They just need to deploy that capability. So learning the basics of conditional access will at least help your data teams to tell.
I think the main thing that you like, a lot of people have, like I even have people coming up to me, they have E5 and they don't even know that they have like MIP labels for Power BI, for example. So
exactly,
I often think, and like I think what you mentioned before, like bringing all the teams together, because with E3 you're already getting quite a lot of things.
That's huge. Yes, that's so much. Yes,
and most people have it. Like especially enterprises, they will have at least E3, maybe sometimes E5 too. But there are so many options and possibilities that they actually already pay for that they don't even know. So I think that bringing people together is a really good thing too. But they have to know 100%, it exists. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. My day job is convincing people to use what they've already bought. So that's, I'm not like trying to sell them something new. I'm just trying to get them to say, hey, you have this. Why don't you turn this on and secure yourself? It's very harder for large enterprises, but yeah, even with Microsoft Small Business Premium, that licensing, you get a lot of capability that you can deploy to secure. So instead of the old school way of just using IP ranges, there is a lot of capability that you can use with conditional access and Entra to secure your data. And if you go through, you can use like sensitivity labels and use encryption um, and other things. But at a minimum, if you're not even doing MFA everywhere and using stronger MFA, that is like the bare minimum these days to do like zero trust, because attackers somehow get into the device, right? They have malware, they get the user to click something, download some malware, and they can just get into the network fairly um, easily, right? We find a lot of 0 days and other things. So you bring in this concept of zero trust to use things like phishing resistant auth to secure your users, make sure that it's your users that are accessing the data and not somebody else.
Makes sense. And actually, there was a really good presentation, I think probably from one of your colleagues at Ignite about zero trust. I'll put it in the link description below too. It has some really cool videos about it. Okay, so maybe the last question. I think we already covered some of these things, but at the recent Ignite, there were a lot of really cool new features announced that will take this zero trust to the next level. What are you most excited about?
The one I'm most excited is Microsoft Entra private access, because before you had to do a lot of things to, like, there was no way to protect on-prem things before, right? Like in Australia, we have this thing called the maturity levels. There are 3 levels of maturity that all organizations need to sort of like align themselves to. And maturity level 2 is to have phishing resistant auth. Now, with Entra private access, which is going to come up soon, you can define policies without having to onboard so many applications into Entra. You can say your old school SQL Server, your old school SAP, that you want to do modern authentication, do MFA. You can apply all those policies today and protect the data. So that's something I'm very excited about. Like, even if it's like a SQL Server that you need to access or an Oracle DB, we can define at the protocol level by looking at the protocol and saying, for this protocol, apply this rule. And all the admin has to do is just go to the config and turn it on. So Entra itself is like a SaaS service, and it's all just in the UI to go to the web browser, go click, hit save, and the policy is done. So in Entra, the actual fact of turning something on will just take minutes, right? But it's usually convincing everyone and the planning and things that take months of work to do, as opposed to the actual technical work that's needed for it.
All right, that makes sense. Well, I thank you very much. I think we've learned a lot, and I think for many people who are listening to this, it's a lot, because as I mentioned before, we're used to learning about primary keys, foreign keys, custom call store indexes, and not security. But it's the reason why I wanted to get you on is because we're having a lot of discussion with our customers about it too, especially moving from a PaaS platform to a SaaS platform, where this is top of mind for all of us, and hopefully this has helped people. I will send them your Twitter or X and your YouTube,
Awesome.
and where they can learn way more if they want to. So yeah, really thank you for your time and really appreciate it.
Awesome. Yeah, absolutely. I just started a conditional access series on my YouTube channel. So
Really good.
I'm just starting from the very basics, assuming like you don't know anything about conditional access. I've done 2 videos, but yeah, I need to publish more. But my plan is to just give a beginner's introduction to conditional access, because almost everyone will need to know a little bit about it. And that's going to play an important part, whatever role you're in. So it's a timely thing to do.
Yes. All right.
And thank you so much for having me on. I can't believe the time went by so quickly. We've been talking for more than an hour at the moment.
Yes. Yeah. All right. Thank you very much.
Cool. Awesome. See you next time.
And that concludes another episode of Kasper On BI. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you liked it. If so, hit the like button. Subscribe for more content. There's more coming up. I have some cool things planned. I hope you learned a lot about security. I put links in the description below for those of you who want to learn more about this. So thank you for attending, and I'll see you next time.